Born into a kingdom under siege, Anne of Brittany came into the world in 1477 as the daughter of Duke Francis II of Brittany, the last independent ruler of a fiercely proud duchy. From the start, Anne's life was tangled in a web of ambition, betrayal, and political survival. As the only surviving legitimate child of her father, she inherited not only Brittany's riches and beauty, but also the burden of its independence. A legacy that would force her into a marriage with the very man who brought down her house, a girl with a crown too heavy. Anne was only 11 when her father died in 1488, leaving her as the Duchess of Brittany. In a time when female rulers were rare and often seen as mere pawns for marriage alliances, Anne's youth made her duchy especially vulnerable. France, always hungry for more territory, had long eyed Brittany, the large semi-independent region in the northwest of modern-day France. Her father had spent years trying to fend off French domination, forming alliances with England and the Habsburg Empire. But in the end, France's military might proved overwhelming. Shortly before his death, Duke Francis lost the Battle of Saint-Aubin-du-Cormier to French forces, paving the way for France to exert more control over Brittany. Yet Anne, despite her age, was no passive duchess. She was spirited, intelligent, and fiercely determined to preserve Brittany's independence. She ruled in her own name, issuing edicts and managing affairs of state with the help of loyal advisors. But the wolves were already at the door. A marriage of defiance. In a bold act of defiance against French dominance, Anne married Maximilian I of Austria, the future Holy Roman Emperor, by proxy in 1490. Though she and Maximilian never met, the marriage was intended as a political maneuver, to tie Brittany to a powerful ally who could shield it from French encroachment. But this move backfired. The French viewed Anne's marriage as a direct threat to their sovereignty. King Charles VIII of France, who was young, ambitious, and already plotting the conquest of Italy, responded with swift aggression. French troops invaded Brittany, quickly surrounding Rennes, where Anne held court. Despite her bravery, she could not withstand the siege. At just 14 years old, Anne faced a devastating ultimatum: annul her marriage to Maximilian and submit to a union with King Charles VIII, or lose her duchy altogether. Marrying the enemy. In 1491, Anne was escorted to Langeais, where she was forced to marry King Charles V of France. Though both parties technically agreed to the union, it was clear that Anne had little choice. Charles had led the campaign that crushed her allies, captured her cities, and isolated her diplomatically. He had brought Brittany to its knees. The marriage was celebrated with fanfare, but beneath the silk and jewels was the bitter truth. Anne was uniting with the man who had destroyed her family's legacy. Her marriage contract included a cruel clause: Brittany would lose its independence if Anne died without a male heir. The duchy that had once stood proud and defiant now stood at the brink of absorption into France. Yet Anne did not surrender easily. A queen, yet still a duchess. Though she was now Queen of France, Anne insisted on retaining her title as Duchess of Brittany. She continued to use the Breton language at her court and wore symbols of her duchy even as she sat beside the king. She kept alive the customs, traditions, and identity of her people. Behind palace walls, she quietly defied the idea that Brittany would simply disappear. Despite Charles VIII's earlier arrogance, the marriage became somewhat functional. Anne bore him several children, though none survived infancy. With each failed pregnancy, the union that bound Brittany to France grew more fragile. Then, in 1498, tragedy struck. King Charles VIII died suddenly at the age of 27 after striking his head on a low doorway. The court plunged into mourning, but Anne saw a flicker of opportunity. Second marriage, same fate. Now a widow at 21, Anne had the legal right to choose her next husband. She returned to Brittany and resumed rule as an independent duchess. Once more, she looked for a powerful ally to protect her duchy. Yet once more, French politics cornered her. The new king, Louis XV, Charles's cousin and successor, annulled his own marriage to pursue Anne. For him, marrying the Duchess of Brittany meant keeping the duchy within the French crown. For Anne, the situation echoed her earlier fate. surrender Brittany through marriage or risk war once again. In 1499, Anne reluctantly married Louis XV. Though he was more considerate than Charles VIII, the marriage still symbolized the loss of the independence she had fought for. As queen consort for a second time, Anne bore Louis 2 daughters, including Claude of France. Ever the strategist, Anne tried to secure Brittany's future by marrying her daughter Claude to Charles of Habsburg, heir to the Holy Roman Empire, the same dynasty she had once allied with through her own proxy marriage to Maximilian. But Louis XV thwarted her efforts and betrothed Claude to his successor, Francis III, ensuring that Brittany would remain within France's grasp. Death of a duchess, not a dream. Anne died in 1514 at the age of 36. In her final years, she never stopped defending Brittany's autonomy. She issued laws as Duchess, resisted French officials interfering in Breton affairs, and fought to ensure that her duchy wouldn't vanish into history. Despite her efforts, Brittany was permanently united with France after her death. When her daughter Claude married Francis I, Anne's dream of a sovereign Brittany was lost, but her legacy endured. She was buried in the Basilica of Saint-Denis, yet her heart, by her own will, was returned to Brittany, sealed in a gold reliquary and placed beside her parents in Nantes. It was a final, symbolic act of devotion to the land she had ruled, defended, and loved. Legacy Anne of Brittany remains a symbol of resistance, pride, and determination. She was the only woman in history to be crowned Queen of France twice, yet she never let the glitter of court life distract her from her mission, preserving her homeland. She lived a life full of contradictions, a queen who never stopped being a duchess, a bride who married 2 kings but remained loyal to her people, and a ruler whose power came not from conquest, but from quiet endurance. Though history often celebrates kings and conquerors, Anne's story stands as a powerful reminder: even in defeat, there is dignity. Even in forced silence, there is voice. And in a world ruled by men, Anne of Brittany made sure history would not forget the woman who dared to fight.